In today's lesson, entrepreneurs, we will look into the infamous disruptive innovation. What exactly is a disruptive innovation, and what exactly are the characteristics of a disruptive innovation, so that as you move through this class through the course of this year, you can start to think and formulate why your disruptive innovation, the disruptive innovation that you will invent, if it does indeed meet up to the criteria of a disruptive innovation, and hopefully it will give you a path or a lens to follow when you come up with your amazing, life-changing, world-changing ideas. So let's get into it. Or for this lesson, materials required would be a computer with internet access, notebook and pen, storage device to save your work, a classroom smartboard, and the preparation for this class is to read Act 3 in the text. So here are some of the questions that will be answered in this lesson. What is a disruptive innovation? What do disruptive innovations do? What makes them so special? Who usually creates disruptive innovations? Although they can be created by anyone, who is, statistically, who creates them? Why do customers love buying disruptive innovations? How do disruptors kill the incumbents? And incumbents are basically the company that's already there, that's established. Where do they enter the market? All right, and that's also known as a beachhead, meaning who are the first customers that usually start buying disruptors? What is the innovation dilemma? And why is history important in the creation and the invention or dreaming up the idea for a disruptive innovation? How does history play into the innovation process? So here is what disruptive innovations do. Here are the characteristics of disruptors. They enter the market through the lower end of the market. What that means is at the top of the market are where all of the wealthy companies that are selling their current products to very moneyed and wealthy customers who could pay $1 million or $2 million for their product. And it's very profitable up at that altitude dealing with those customers. So the disruptor creates something that is easier to create. It's cheaper. And the people at the lower end that can't afford to pay millions of dollars for a product, they can afford it, and they call that the lower end of the market. And the big moneyed companies, they don't want to go down there because it's not as profitable. Why would they want to go down there and make $5 in profit when they can stay up here where it's cushy and nice and make $1,000 in profit or $1 million in profit per unit that they sell? So they enter the market at the lower part of the they enter the market at the bottom, and they just cannibalize all of the people at the bottom who couldn't afford what the wealthy people could afford. Now everybody can have it that's not necessarily wealthy. So they provide access to products that the working class poor could never afford with a better product, and it's a lot less expensive. And they, by doing this, once they get a certain amount of market share, they kill the incumbent. They said by the time the incumbent, who's used to very big profits, finds out that there's this disruptor that is taking all the customers that couldn't afford their product, it's too late. And the large incumbent customer gets killed almost like a virus, right? They turn, and because they do this, they give access to so many millions of people, so many millions of people that could ordinarily couldn't afford a product like that. It turns them into billionaires multiple times over. All right, a disruptive innovation is the most aggressive aggressive stance in innovation throughout the world. All investors want to invest in disruptors. CEOs are afraid of them, are terrified of them. And once they do this, and once they catch fire and their commodities become really super hot, they create a whole new industry underneath their disruptor. All right, and this is so when Sean Fanning invented Napster, he disrupted the music industry and created a whole new industry of digital transformation. People buying products digitally, music specifically digitally, that now exists today. All right, so that is what disruptors do. They're the top of the food chain. The people that create them are allegedly geniuses. They're seen as geniuses. They are called things like visionaries and mavericks and trailblazers, because they were able to see a place in society that they could disrupt, and then they actually go about doing it. So a disruptive innovation is literally the North Star of the entire world as far as the corporate world is. It's the top of the food chain. So again, just to drill the point home, disruptors usually come in at the bottom, right, with the common folk, and the people at the top don't even see it coming. The big CEOs making 10, 20, $100 million a year, they don't even see it coming. And there are tons of stories that are like cautionary tales about this. Like Kodak is probably one of the most famous stories. Kodak was the camera company. Everybody used to take pictures when I was a kid with film and Kodak cameras, and you'd have to put the film inside the camera and then latch it down, and it was a process. And then if you took it out and the sunlight got it got exposed, and all of your pictures were destroyed. And incidentally, and Kodak was the big incumbent. They were, everybody bought Kodak cameras, Kodak films, and you have to drop it off at like a store, and then 3 days later you come back and pick it up, and they would take your film and they would turn it into pictures, and you would have your pictures in your hand and you would look through the pictures. It was a whole thing. Everybody was doing it. It was throughout the entire world, right? Incidentally, an engineer came up with the idea to do this digitally, to do this on a digital camera, so you can have some storage device and take the pictures and then just download them on some sort of a computer, right, or some other device, and you could look at them on your camera. It was an engineer that was working for Kodak that came up with the idea of digital pictures that's now given explosion to Facebook, Instagram, or all of these different social media platforms. This engineer worked for Kodak. Kodak was so arrogant, and they thought that their reign of dominance would never end, that they sold the technology that this engineer came up with and brushed him off and was like, "Be quiet, this is nothing. Get out of here. This is worthless." Sold it for some ridiculously low price to some other company. I forget the name of the company. For like $10,000, just gave it away like, "this is useless." And that same technology came back and put Kodak out of business years later. Disrupted the entire camera market. All right, this engineer that worked for Kodak did that, and it's a cautionary tale. It's a cautionary tale to say, don't ever think that you're so big that some little small disruptor can't come from underneath you and out of their garage or out of a basement and put a multi-billion-dollar international company out of business. So a disruptor, you can think of it almost like a demolition squad that destroys, a high-rise building, which is you can see as a company, and then rebuilds a better, sexier, more affordable building to the masses in its place. And it's the most aggressive mentality in all of the corporate world. And incidentally, these at Ivy League schools throughout the country, they program their kids to think in terms of disruptive innovation. They walk around, they call themselves, they name their companies Disrupt. It's a mentality. It's almost like the way Customato, the famous boxing trainer who created 3 heavyweight champions, including Mike Tyson, programmed and brainwashed Mike Tyson to be the youngest heavyweight champion in the history of the sport. And we're doing it now. We're making disruption available for the world. So yes, this notion of a disruptive innovation is as amazing as it sounds. It's a path to it's a fast track to becoming a billionaire if you can do it. But as exciting and as amazing as it is, it's only the first step as far as innovation is concerned. If you look here at this chart, which we'll get into later, you can see that disruptive innovation is just the first one, right? And then there's all these other sorts of innovations that good CEOs have to be mindful of and have to push their engineers and their creative team to constantly be thinking to make sure that the disruptive innovation that they create and that they're now selling and that they've now destroyed the incumbent, that this disruptive innovation doesn't get disrupted by another young gun. All right. And so disruption is, as I said before, is just the first step. But innovation is known as the best way, the most effective way to create lots of money and large sums of capital. Any economist will tell you that innovation is the key to doing it. It is the best way. The only thing that bests innovation is, unfortunately, war. War is basically you go and you take an industry through force, through the military, and a lot of technology was designed just for that purpose, for in times of war. Now technology is also being used to disrupt, and disruptive innovations are basically acts of war against the incumbent. So just be mindful is that when you create your disruptive innovation, the investors that will give you money to start your company are going to want to know that you are mindful and have an understanding that after you create your disruptor, you have to continue to disrupt in all of these different ways. And you see here something that we'll also talk about later, value. You'll see that there's even a category called value engineering and value migration. All right. So value is the key, and it is something that will be near and dear to you in this class. So again, just to make sure we're clear, the historic disruptors, they're large, expensive, slow, only affordable to the rich. Like the first computers, big, they took up a whole room, expensive. Only the wealthy companies could afford them. And they were slow. They did their work slow. It took a one whole day to this big machine. And then, people like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates disrupted that whole industry and came up with the personal computer. And now it was smaller, it was a lot cheaper, faster, and affordable to the masses. Their vision to disrupt the industry was that in the future, at that time, everybody was going to have a computer on their desk. All right. So that was a major disruption, and true to form, it turned Bill Gates and Steve Jobs into billionaires through Apple Computer and Microsoft. It was a huge deal. It was it was life changing. And then, but there were disruptions that came before that, obviously, with the tube, and this was it was basically a switch, and this is what made those big computers work, these tubes, these filament tubes. And then that was disrupted, though that product was disrupted by the transistor, which was created with logic, which is the basis of all of the computers and handheld computers and PCs and smartphones and everything that's technology, everything that's going on right now, Uber, Netflix, all of that is a function of the disruption and the invention of the transistor, which was, again, smaller, cheaper, faster, and affordable to the masses. And these innovations, throughout history, that we take for granted, that nobody talks about, have made the current technological environment possible that we live in and reap the benefits, the comforts of today. So disruption is it's growth, and engineers, software engineers, are usually the ones that come up with these disruptors because of something called logic, right? And logic is something we're going to get into next, but it is the basis of the thought process of innovation. All right, computer technology programmers, it's a language for them. They call it syntax or computer coding. All of these words and acronyms are basically talking about logic and logic statements. So an understanding and becoming comfortable thinking logically is the fast track and the key for you as a young entrepreneur to, in the future, hopefully in the not so distant future, to disrupt the industry that you may in, whether it be automotive or construction or computer graphic design, whatever it is. It's ripe for disruption, and this is how you need to think about it. Now, when companies are young and starting off in their idea stage for their disruptor, they are placed in something called an incubator, which is a company that just takes care of them until they can get to the IPO stage, initial public offering, where they go public, and that's when their creators become billionaires. So essentially, your school is right now acting as an incubator. But traditionally, the schools that were incubators for these great billionaires were only at the Ivy League, where the children of the top 1%, the people who control 90% of the world's wealth, send their kids. Bill Gates, Harvard, Steve Jobs, Harvard, allegedly both dropouts. Jim Bezos, Princeton, the first trillionaire who disrupted the way we buy from brick and mortar, which is a company that you walk into like a Target, to buying everything over the internet. He saw that. He's an engineer. All of these people are engineers, and he went to Princeton. Tesla, he's the only guy that I don't think went to an Ivy League school, but he is definitely born with the silver spoon in his mouth. His parents are from South Africa. He's from South Africa, and his family made their money with emerald mines in South Africa, which I'm not sure if you know, but South Africa was it was in apartheid. It was basically modern day slavery in Africa. So I'm telling you this. The reason you're being told this is that this should put a bit of a chip on your shoulder to say that kids at the Ivy League are not the only ones that can disrupt. And that in itself, that mentality in itself is disruptive. So food for thought. So disruptors are essentially made with logic. And these little symbols here, logic, are you may think they're insignificant, but they are definitely not. The biggest example of a disruptive innovation logic is the stoplight. Incidentally invented by an African American gentleman. I'm sorry, his name evades me now, but he is the inventor of the stoplight. And another invention that he came up with was the gas mask, which arguably, the United States of America would never have become what it is, traversing the country without stoplights, because trains would have been running into each other. And he did not go to an Ivy League school, and it's a timeless innovation that still stands today. He was born in the 1800s, so right in the midst of slavery and segregation and Jim Crow. So the way that logic is basically a very objective way of looking at things, almost like you're like you're, I don't want to use the word stupid, but if green, go; if red, stop; if yellow, prepare to stop. Very, what's in front of my face, let me deal with it and then move on to the next thing. And logic is the basis of computer programming. Computer coding is full of logic statements, as they're called. One of the most famous logic statements is the if-then logic statement. And in this class, you're going to be given a logic statement that we have invented that will help you to walk you through the thought process of creating your disruptor, and then will also allow you to understand how other great innovators came up with their ideas. You'll be able to do something called reverse engineer their disruptors, and it's almost like transcribing the thought process of innovation. After you do it for a while, then you'll just start coming up with great disruptive innovations on your own. So logic and disruption are hand in hand. They're synonymous. They go together. So a little more on logic. Logic is basically problem solving. Anytime you come up with a solution for a problem, you are essentially thinking logically. So to the left we have, and this is just a few different ways you're going to see logic articulated in academia. In the middle you see computer programming, and again we say the the most famous logic statement is the if-then logic statement. It's incidentally studied in psychology, which will lead to another theory you'll learn later, that you're supposed to actually reinvent yourself and your product and sell both of them as a package deal, which is so the fact that logic, specifically the if-then logic statement is taught in psychology, sort of is proof that you can reinvent yourself as well as you can invent a product, right? And so those are the symbols for it. And then a lot of times when you're working with a company and you're trying to get your entire company to think a certain way, you'll give them something called a flow chart, and it's to the right side you see risk and yes and no. That's a way of just looking at taking directions logically. It's almost like a roadmap. Like, if this happens, do this. If that happens, do that. And it's all based on the most famous logic statement of them all, the if-then logic statement. So if you're thinking about taking computer programming classes and you're like, why do I need that? Computer programming classes teach you how to think logically, and it's basically the mentality, the thought process of innovation. And there's all sorts of variations to the if-then law. There's the if-then, there's the if-then else, there's the else-if. I mean, it can get pretty complicated, but it's all based on logic and the if-then logic statement. The more you train your mind to think like that, the easier it will be to disrupt in whatever industry you find yourself in. Now, also a big part of logic is replacement. All right. Instead, anytime you hear somebody say instead of, right, and our logic statement, I guess we should just disclose it right now. Our logic statement, the proprietary logic statement that I told you about, that you're going to master and you're going to use to come up with ideas for your disruptors and be able to reverse engineer, is the instead of what if. That is our logic statement that we created. That's just for you to help you come up with your ideas. And a lot of logic and innovation is about replacement, and it's actually built into math. So actually, logic and math are actually they intertwine. So if you look at algebra, if you see here to the left hand corner, you see V of I plus V of C plus V of R is equal to $200 million. That's actually equal to, you can replace that with V of I plus C plus R. It's the same thing, right? And I didn't know this in college, but that sort of going through those mathematical operations was training me to think logically and to think about replacements and substitutions, which is a very big part of innovation. I didn't know that when I was there. I was just like, why are they killing us with all this math, and what is the purpose of it? But that's the purpose of it. The innovation thought process is built into the mechanics and the logic of mathematics. And this is the actual logic statement in action that you will, throughout the course of this class, you will learn to use. You will use it in a number of different ways, and it will hope like in the same way that musicians play solos of great soloist musicians like Miles Davis or Tchaikovsky, Beethoven. This is similar to that. This is basically transcribing the thought process of innovation so that you'll understand how great innovators were thinking, and then you can just start flying and thinking like an innovator and innovating yourself. So all this brings us to the CEO's dilemma, which the expectation is that after you, ladies and gentlemen, have worked in your respective careers or your respective areas of interest and study, you will rise to the CEO through some amazing disruptive innovation. And your dilemma will be, do you create products for your top wealthy, very moneyed customers that are very high profit, or do you create really amazing products that your customers will see amazing value in, and they will be willing to pay 20, 30, 40, 50, 60% profit margins on top of what it cost you to make? Or will you make less products that are not as valuable, so that you could sell those quote unquote cheaper products to all of the customers that can't afford to buy your deluxe models? So as an example, or will you do both? Will you do both at the same time? And will you create a product suite that addresses the financial concerns of the top customers as well as the bottom? What will you do? Where will you position yourself? What will be your positioning, and how will you achieve that? That is the CEO's dilemma. And good CEOs are always in their office toiling about how they will balance that, and because if they go down and start selling cheaper products, for lack of a better word, to the customers at the bottom of the economic spectrum, then it may not be that desirable for their top moneyed customers, because they may say, hey, I don't want a product that the poor people can buy. The reason I'm buying your product is because the poor people can't buy it. So how will you balance that? That is the CEO's dilemma, and your vision as a CEO will hopefully steer you in the right direction and keep your company moving, so that some young gun disruptor coming out of a school very similar to yours in the future doesn't put you out of business. Your assignment for this class is to go back and look at your respective industry. If you're in woodshop, if you're in automotive, if you're in graphic design, this is sort of a history lesson. Go back and find out 2 or 3 of the disruptive innovations that led your industry to the maturity where it is today, and figure out what made that disruptive innovation so successful. How did the disruptors of your past in your industry, how did they disrupt their industry? How did they deal with the CEO's dilemma? Did they come in at the bottom? Did they come in at the top? And why did they successfully disrupt that industry? And how did it advance the industry to where it is today? Because the reason you're going to do this is that history and that understanding will lead you and give you the vision as a trailblazer, as a visionary, as a CEO into the future. The people who you revere in any industry, whether it's in clothing, Marc Jacobs, or whether it's in music, Miles Davis, or whoever. Miles Davis, the only musician to ever invent 5 types of music genres on his own. He's the only one to do that. These people didn't just pull these innovations out of thin air. They know the history of their industry back hundreds and hundreds of years. They studied it. They studied the progression of it. They know, like boxers, like Mike Tyson as an example, knows the history of Jack Dempsey and Sugar Ray Robinson and Muhammad Ali. Obviously, these people are their heroes, and they take a little piece of all of the innovations of these great inventors of their industry, and they use that to invent into the future. and you should do the same. So history is of all great entrepreneurs that disrupt industries, they are history buffs. They love history, and so should you. So that is your assignment for this class. Find at least 1 to 3 disruptors in your industry and be able to speak to, be able to get up and speak and explain how this innovation disrupted the industry and how it led to where the industry is today. And that information will give you a lens into where you're going to take it into the future. Have fun. Good luck. God bless.